You'll be great, you'll be swell. Those words were said by Mama Rose at the beginning of the musical Gypsy, and I'm sure she would be rejoicing at the fact that theatres are going to reopen in London very soon. My name's Pepe Martinez. I'm a London Blue Badge tourist guide. I'm one of 600 members of the Association of Professional Tour Guides, and we manage these Guide London live broadcasts and the Guide London website. And we would like to welcome you if this is your first time joining us today. We know we've got plenty of regulars with us who join us every week. So thank you. We've been doing these broadcasts for over a year now. So wherever you are in the world, if you'd like to give us a hello in chat, we will, of course, give you a little shout out if we can during the broadcast. And today, we're going to concentrate on one of my favorite things, one of the great loves of my life, Theatreland. And for those of you that have been joining us on a regular basis, you know we've covered subjects as wide as Windsor Castle, the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, Charles Dickens, and even Freddie Mercury. So today, though, we're going to concentrate on Theatreland, as I said. And to do that, we're going to be joined with by my esteemed colleague, Simon. Good afternoon, Simon. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Pepe. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very well, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to be with you and to be discussing our favourite subject, Pepe. Our favourite subject in the world, theatre.
I couldn't think of anybody that I would rather spend 40 minutes talking about theatre with than you, Simon. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have a look at what happened in lockdown. So what did theatres do to adapt very quickly in lockdown to try to retain their audiences? What adaptations are they going to be making as theatres begin to reopen again? What's coming back into the West End? But also, what are the things that we're going to be looking out for? So it's a slightly extended version today. And I have to tell you that Ursula, who is our marketing genius here at Guide London, she's normally in the studio with us, she's the puppet mistress behind the scenes, pulling all the strings, but she is away today. And so I feel like, I don't know about you, Simon, I feel like I've been given the keys to the candy store to do whatever we want. So we'll try to keep ourselves under control. But
well, as they say in the theatre, Pepe, this one could run and run, couldn't it? I mean, we could be, if we get carried away, Pepe,
Well, we're going for a West End transfer. So I've got my Follies mug appropriately. Now, I thought we'd begin with just a few facts and figures. So just a few facts and figures about the importance of Theatreland to the economy in London. And so the last year that we've got accurate figures for, 2019, about £800 million on box office alone, just on tickets. So if you add into that travel and meals in restaurants, so the Theatreland economy is worth well over £1 billion. So it's really important. So you can imagine how devastating it's been, not just for guides, because often we take clients out who are here to visit theatre. Simon, how often do you take a client out on tour that is in London solely to enjoy theatre?
Gosh, I would say about half, probably about at least 50% of the guests that we guide probably are, one of the main reasons they've come to London is because they've come to see a play or a musical in the West End.
We're so lucky, aren't we? We do take it for granted, but they now tell us there's nearly 300 performance spaces in London and about 40 theatres, what we call West End theatres, so that the main commercial centre. The last year, again, we've got accurate figures for. The average ticket price in 2019 was £52.16, which is about $65 US. And the average ticket price on Broadway in 2019 was $123. So it was nearly double on average to see a show on Broadway compared to a show in London. But Simon, why don't you explain to the audience why that disparity exists, why it's so different?
Yes, well, the people that take the hit there are actually the performers, because we have an actors' union called Equity, which represents the interests of its members, and that's been around since the 1930s. But they set sort of the minimum wage levels, if you will, for West End performers, and right now it's somewhere in the region of about £560 per week. Minimum, which is about a third of the salary on Broadway. So that's the reason why.
It's quite amazing, isn't it? The difference, it really is. So
yeah, and if you compare the fact that more people go to see a play or a musical than go to see a Premier League football match, well, my goodness, if the performers were paid the same salaries as the football players, it would be quite a different story, wouldn't it?
It certainly would. Now, I think we should move on. Let's have a look at some of the things that we personally experienced in lockdown. So how did theatres pivot? How did they continue to find an audience? And this began, remember, we went into lockdown like many of you last late March. And that's why we started doing these guideline London broadcasts. We wanted to continue bringing London to the world. If you couldn't come to us, we decided to come to you. Now, I forgot to mention, I know some of you are probably watching on YouTube. We're up to 867 subscribers on YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please make sure that you do. When we get to 1,000 subscribers, we're actually going to be earning some revenue from the advertising. So YouTube think we're good enough already to have a few adverts before our main shows. And so let's see if we can get to 1,000 before we finish the broadcasts in the summer. Now, Simon, should we have a look at some of the delights that we enjoyed during lockdown?
Yes, absolutely. So, well, actually, we were both going to see a show on the day that lockdown happened, weren't we? We were both going to see the same show. And if you remember, Pepe, it was City of Angels, which was starring at the time Vanessa Williams, who many of our audience will know, great singer-actress. And literally, as we got to the theatre, along with all the other members of the audience, that's when the news broke that we were going into lockdown. And we couldn't really have imagined, could we, at that moment, of course, how we'd still be here, you know, just over a year later.
We all assumed that we'd be back there within a couple of weeks, that it would all be over. And I think nobody understood the magnitude of the texts that we were getting on that fateful evening. So one of the first, I think, theatre companies to pivot very quickly was the National Theatre. I'm sure many of you know the National Theatre. It's a state-sponsored. It's sponsored by the arts. State-sponsored, so they get sponsorship, finance from the government, so centrally funded. But the majority of their funding comes from ticket sales and private donations and sponsorship, of course. But they began showing every Thursday on YouTube one of their filmed productions. So the National have been filming their productions for about 10 years. And so they've got this huge archive. And so they started putting the content for free every Thursday, including one of my favorite shows, One Man, Two Governors, which I think is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. That's a little picture from One Man, Two Governors at the top of the screen there. And then they pivoted again, and then they created essentially a Netflix style program where you could pay a monthly fee and then all your content would be included. So the National, one of the first theatres or theatre companies to actually pivot very quickly and adapt to the new conditions. Did you see any of the live broadcasts, Simon? Were you able to watch any?
Yes, actually, the one that really sticks in my mind is, interestingly, the Deep Blue Sea, which was a play by Terence Rattigan, which starred Helen McCrory. And of course, we're thinking about her family now, because Helen McCrory sadly passed away just several days ago. And but I suppose in many ways, you know, we now have this great, as you say, Pepe, this great record of her great performance and all the other great performances in the play as a result of this situation. So that's one of the upsides, is that we have these great historic performances now on record.
It was quite shocking, Helen McCrory's death, because there'd been nothing in the press about it at all, about her illness. So I think it was actually quite shocking. And she was one of the greatest stage actresses I've ever had the experience to witness. So yeah. Moving on. So we're going out of London now. We're going up to Leicester, and the Leicester Curve Theatre. They pivoted a little bit later than the National. They began filming. They began reviving some of their productions and filming them. And then you could buy tickets and watch the broadcasts. I didn't see all three. I actually saw Sunset Boulevard. So Sunset Boulevard is one of my favorite musicals, Andrew Lloyd Webber, the 1990s. And so they filmed it in an empty theatre. And it had this incredible quality to it, because within the production, within the live broadcast, they were bringing in shots of Hollywood, and the cast was spread around the entire theatre. I think it worked really well. I think you saw it as well, didn't you, Simon?
I did, yes. And yes, you're absolutely right. And it worked on so many different levels because you really got the sense of the film qualities. You know, obviously it was this great Hollywood film directed by Billy Wilder originally, and they brought those elements into this empty auditorium. So really a great example of how a production was really creatively adapted. And I suppose in a way it's a great sort of story about a comeback, isn't it? So, and we're coming back, now, Of
course, yeah. So one more before we move on, ladies and gentlemen. So the Old Vic. So the Old Vic began filming their productions. I think A Monster Calls was one of the earliest ones that they filmed. If you've never seen it, if you get a chance to see it, absolutely phenomenal. I wept like a baby at the end. But over Christmas, they revived a production that they first, I think, put together about 3 or 4 years ago. The assistant director of this production, by the way, is the son of one of Simon and mine's dearest guiding friends, Sally Strange. And what they did is, rather than film it and then broadcast it, it was actually filmed live. So the actors were working live every night. So essentially a live relay, again, which gave the whole production a completely kind of, an exciting quality, because it was filmed in real time. They didn't stop if anything went wrong. They just continued. And I know Simon was a big fan of another location that also did their own version of A Christmas Carol, which was, Simon?
Yes, well, that was at the Dickens Museum. And of course, it's proof positive, isn't it, that, great theatre doesn't necessarily have to happen in a purpose-built theatre space. The Dickens Museum, which is one of the greatest museums in London where Charles Dickens lived, this wonderful actor called, and I want to say it's Dominic, and I think it's Dominic Hughes. He did a one-man show, which he's actually done over several years now, with a puppet of Ebenezer Scrooge. And it's very difficult to describe to you, but it was all filmed, and you bought and you watched it online. And so that's something I would definitely look out for again, perhaps this coming Christmas season.
No, I would never have gone to that, but Simon very kindly bought me a ticket as a Christmas present, and I watched it, and it was enthralling. It was wonderful how they used those incredible historic rooms, and it was so atmospheric. Now, going to move on, ladies and gentlemen. So hopefully we're beginning to whet your appetite for what waits for you when you come back to London. But just to put your mind at rest, how are the theatres adapting to post-COVID conditions? And so we've just got a few examples to show you. And I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Well, of course, I suppose really for lots of people, it's about, for the audience, it's about building people's confidence, isn't it? Because people might be understandably quite nervous about going into an enclosed space with, hundreds of other people. So we've put this image up here of one of our greatest outdoor spaces. And this is the Regent's Park open air theatre, which has been operating actually since 1932. And they have a fantastic program coming up this summer. In fact, I think we've also got they did actually last summer, they did do Jesus Christ Superstar successfully, socially distanced. But here, in fact, you can see the seating plan of the theatre, and you can see how they have, in this particular case, they've taken out certain gaps, or they've perhaps, they've taken up sort of blocks of seating. So that essentially, one of the main things theatres are doing is allowing people to sit within their bubbles to make it safe. And this is what they've got coming up. So we've got a great variety of productions. We've got Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, wonderful uplifting musical. We've got a pair of star-crossed lovers in the form of Romeo and Juliet. And we've got this brand new production coming from the Unicorn Theatre. Now, the Unicorn Theatre, it was the first purpose-built children's theatre, which has its home, in fact, on the south bank of the river. And, of course, we don't know anything about that production. But I think it's going to be a big hit with not just children, but adults alike. And speaking, of course, of outdoor theatres, if you went back to London, of course, in the late 16th century, and I know we're not talking about history today, Pepe, but we have to make this link, I think, is that, of course, the Globe Theatre was, along with all the other theatres in London at that time, it was open air. And, of course, we have the reconstructed Globe Theatre on the south bank of the River Thames, which opened in 1997. And they've got a production of Romeo and Juliet this summer. along with Twelfth Night, so a great comedy, and also A Midsummer Night's Dream, another sort of great light-hearted comedy. And I noticed that a lot of the theatres are tending to put on rather perhaps lighter pieces, comedic pieces. And goodness knows that's what we all want, isn't it? We all want to be completely uplifted. And after I did see this production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that's being revived for the Globe this year, and it was so, you just left the theatre on a complete cloud after you left. So there's the interior of the Globe. Many of you will know it. And of course, we've got the space where you've got 700 people standing normally and about 900 people sitting, but they're all going to be, and of course, there'll be a certain element of having to sort of self-distance, won't there, I suppose, in the yard where you stand. And then we've got the guided tours. So, of course, a number of our theatres offer guided tours, and the Globe have been offering them since the beginning. And they've already started, in fact, even before the theatre schedule starts in May. They're already offering guided tours for groups. You have to pre-book, but that's worth knowing about. And the Globe also have an indoor space, and this is it. It's called the Sam Wanamaker Theatre, and it's a very beautiful space, much smaller capacity than the outdoor theatre. And what's rather exciting about what they're doing is they're putting on a series of new writing called Metamorphoses by the resident writers of the theatre. There's an interesting point here that, of course, in Shakespeare's lifetime, the Globe and the other theatres were closed down for long periods because of pandemics, because of the plagues. And when Shakespeare went back home to Stratford, perhaps, or lodged in London, pretty exciting stuff came out of those downtimes between performances. So King Lear was written in 1605 during a pandemic, we think. So I think we've got some quite exciting new plays to come out of this, terrible situation.
I agree. I think it's going to be an exciting time for theatre. So we do you want to go out of London briefly? So here we are in Stratford-upon-Avon, aren't we, Simon?
Yes. Well, we're sticking with Shakespeare, but yes, we're up in Stratford-upon-Avon, of course, where Shakespeare was born and where he's buried. And this is a computer graphic, in fact, of the outdoor theatre that's going to be outside the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. So you can see the Royal Shakespeare Theatre is the round building with the cone-shaped roof. That's actually called the Swan Theatre, which opened in 1986. But this is a great space, and I have to get the name right. It's called the Lydia and Manfred Gorvey Garden Theatre, and it's named after two people that were great supporters of the Royal Shakespeare Theatre back in the early days in the 1960s. And again, they're putting on the Comedy of Errors starting in July, which is Shakespeare's shortest and funniest play. So again, quite a sensible decision, I think, to choose something that's not 4 hours long, perhaps, for the audience. And then we come back to London, and we're looking at the interior of the Bridge Theatre. Now, the Bridge Theatre is one of our newest spaces in London, next to the Tower Bridge. The resident artistic director is Nicholas Heitner, formerly of the National Theatre. Now, they actually were quite successful, weren't they, Pepe? Last year, they were one of the very first theatres to adapt by, in fact, you can see there, taking out sections of seating so that you either sat in individual seats or in pairs or in 3s and 4s. And because it's a very flexible space, they're very easily able to adapt the seating accordingly.
And most of the productions they put on between lockdowns, I took this photograph actually, had very small casts, either one or two-handers. I think this was the night we went to see, I was lucky enough to see Maggie Smith do a one-woman play. It's absolutely phenomenal performance.
And of course, having one man or one woman shows or two-handers, as you say, is also, of course, economically, going to be quite important for theatres, isn't it? So perhaps initially in the first few months, we're now looking at again a computer image of the Olivier Theatre, which is the largest space of the 3 spaces at our National Theatre. And again, you see they've already sort of pioneered last year adapting the space. So the Olivier Theatre is in fact a sort of what we call a thrust theatre, so it's seating on 3 sides. But what they've done is they've actually increased the capacity of the auditorium. So I think Olivier's 1,100, isn't it, Pepe?
Yes. Yeah.
And now it's 500 seats more, and they've done it by actually creating theatre in the round. So they've not only increased capacity, but they've also made it COVID safe with the distancing. Brilliant. Isn't it great, you know, all these, you know, again, these innovations that have come out of it, thanks to all of these very talented teams of people working backstage and front of house at the theatres.
It's all out of great struggle sometimes comes some of the most creative and artistic work. It's, as I said, I think it's going to be quite an exciting time. Obviously, people in theatre and the performing arts have really struggled, I think, in lockdown. So hopefully it won't be too devastating for the Theatreland economy when things begin to reopen. Now, when I was asked to do this particular broadcast, when I requested to do this broadcast, I should say, at the time, I wouldn't have included the Victoria and Albert Museum. So the Victoria and Albert Museum, the largest decorative arts museum in the world. Now, why am I including that in a broadcast about Theatreland? Well, they have an entire section devoted to theatre and performance. Now, the collection began in the 1920s out of someone's private collection, actually, that was donated to the museum. And from the 1970s onwards, it was actually housed in a separate museum. From 1987 to 2007, for 20 years, the Theatre Museum was in a building in the centre of Covent Garden. I was lucky enough to work there in the late 80s, one of my first jobs, and some of my happiest memories are working in that incredible museum. Sadly, in 2006, there were major cuts made. They tried to raise £5 million to save it, and unfortunately it didn't work. And so they created a separate space within the V&A for the display of some of their best treasures. I'm just going to show you a couple of some of their costumes to begin with, because it's not just costumes for theatre and dance and ballet and opera, it's also costumes for film as well. The costume on the left was worn by Fred Astaire, arguably the greatest film dancer in history. And then the costume on the right was actually made for a character in a ballet called Parade and was designed by Pablo Picasso, one of the greatest living artists in the world at the time, in 1917. And then just to give you an idea of the variety, the breadth of the collection, this is a costume that was donated to the museum when I was working there, actually, and we displayed it on the ground floor of the museum. And this is a costume, a stage costume that was worn by Sir Elton John in 1974. And so I think that just really brings to life the variety of some of the costumes they have on display. And just a couple of other objects before we move on. On your screen now is a very important document. This is the warrant, essentially allowing the theatres to reopen in 1663, signed by King Charles II. All of our theatres were closed for a time, as well as the pubs. They also banned Christmas as well, but eventually the theatres reopened. And also on the screen now is one of their newer acquisitions. And this is a hat worn by Idina Menzel in the original Broadway production of Wicked about 17 years ago. That's her character, Elphaba. And then two more objects. One of them I put in just for Simon, because here on the left, we've got the dressing gown of one of the greatest British playwrights in history. This is the dressing gown of who, Simon?
Well, I thought it was yours, actually, Pepe, at first. I thought it was, but no, I think you've got a copy of it at home, haven't you? This is actually the master himself, Noel Coward, and he was always swanning about in these wonderful sort of red dressing gowns and smoking jackets. And again, I keep thinking, Pepe, you know, you're talking about all of these things, and of course, Noel Coward wrote, well, perhaps, you know, his funniest play, really, arguably, 1941, Blithe Spirit. And again, he wrote it at a time when the majority of the theatres were closed in London. And actually, it did incredibly well. And it was the most successful, I think, when he wrote it in 1941, most successful play that had been on the stage. And it remained a big hit. So again, you see, out of tragedy comes good things.
Amazing. And then one more object. It's probably the most prized object in the entire collection of the theatre and performance section at the Victoria and Albert Museum. This is an original copy of Shakespeare's First Folio. First printed in 1623, would have cost you £1 to buy a copy. I think there were 500 copies in the first edition printing run, and you won't get much change out of $7 million for a copy of the First Folio today. So that just gives you an idea, I think, of the breadth of their collection. Now, the reason I've included it in the broadcast today is because of post-COVID cuts. The Victoria and Albert Museum, in an attempt to save to cost save, are planning on amalgamating some of the collections. And so they're going to be cutting some of the curators of this particular department. And so there is an online petition at the moment. So log on to change.org and you can see the department. I think it would be a devastating loss to London and Theatreland if we lost that incredible collection of objects. I'm sure you agree, Simon.
Absolutely. I think we should all be fighting tooth and nail to save that fantastic collection. If you know anyone out there, ladies and gentlemen, any philanthropists, anyone with a passion for theatre that wants to step in, alert them to it. Alert them to it, yeah.
We're going to move on now. We've got two more little sections for you. We're going to have a quick look at some of the shows that are returning to the West End.
Yes, and well, the first one that we're looking at here, of course, is the longest running play in the world, and it's called The Mousetrap, and it was written by the queen of detective fiction, Dame Agatha Christie. And you can see there, it's at the St Martin's Theatre. That's a slightly out-of-date photograph because, in fact, it is now in its 69th year, and nothing has stopped The Mousetrap since it opened in 1952, apart from the COVID pandemic. But rather happily, this murder mystery is going to be reopening on May the 17th, so that's actually very soon. And very interestingly, I noticed that they have an all-star cast. Now, usually the Mousetrap doesn't sort of have a cast with perhaps well-known names. So again, that's one of the things I think maybe theatres are doing just to bring people in perhaps initially. One of the names is Danny Mack, who's a very well-known television actor and indeed stage actor as well. So The Mousetrap will return. It is returning.
I am ashamed to say, Simon, that I have never seen The Mousetrap, but I think because of what's going on, I think it's one of those shows that I will make an effort to see. I think we often put off things with, I'll do that next year, I'll do that tomorrow. But I think COVID, one of the things that's come out of COVID for me is don't put off until tomorrow what you can probably squeeze in today.
Yeah.
So I think we've got another Agatha Christie coming back into London.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So this is the County Hall building, which is on the south bank of the river, right next to the London Eye, which you can just see to the left-hand side. And this formerly was a big government building. And for the last, at least 3 years, it's been home to this production of Witness for the Prosecution, Agatha Christie's favourite play of her own. And the action takes place in a courtroom, and the space inside the County Hall is the courtroom. So they stage it in a courtroom. Now, I understand that they're not reopening until August this year, and that's because the government have said that theatres cannot operate at full capacity at the moment. So presumably, they can't afford to operate at reduced capacity. Most theatres are going to be probably at 25 to 50% capacity. So August is the date for Witness for the Prosecution. But again, terrific staging, terrific production. And yes, again, longest. Now, I always say longest running musical in the West End, but actually I think Les Miserables might.
Oh, yes, it's the second longest.
It's the second longest, isn't
it?
Les Mis
opened in October 85 at the Barbican, transferred to the Palace in December 85. Phantom opened in October 86. And I know that because I was working front of house as an usher, a ticket tearer, on the very original production of Phantom of the Opera. So yes, I'm that old.
You're part of theatrical history, Pepe. I mean, look at that.
There's probably a blue plaque to me there somewhere, Simon.
Didn't you know Henry Irving at one time? I don't know. The 19th century. No, not that far back. But Phantom of the Opera, yes.
Interesting news about Phantom, isn't there? I think that's been announced firstly today, but also what they're doing with the production when they bring it back. It's caused a little bit of controversy, I believe.
That's right. Yes. So well, first of all, yes, the show is reopening, but two things. The orchestra, which historically they've had the biggest orchestra of any show in the West End, formerly 27 players, that's been reduced down to 14. And also the set, which it has been up there for quite a long time, is having a complete refresh. And there's some discussion as to whether they're going to be adapting some of the original designs from 1986. That remains to be seen. But the most exciting news of all, which is breaking news, and this news broke, I think, just this morning, didn't it, Pepe?
Yep.
For the first time, well, in the London Run's history, the lead role of Christine, who of course the Phantom falls in love with, is going to be played by a black actor, and her name is Lucy St. Louis. And she has already got quite a number of West End credits to her name, and she will be the first black performer to play the role of Christine in the West End run. I think they already had an actor on tour several years ago, so that is fantastic. And goodness knows, you know, we need more diversity.
Oh, definitely.
In the West End.
Now, another musical that's coming back in, but it's coming into a larger home, is a musical that I think was launched in Edinburgh a couple of years ago, a small production. And this musical has just exploded, I think, onto both the London and Broadway scenes.
Yes, so of course it's the musical Six, which is the story of the 6 wives of King Henry VIII. And we were chatting about this earlier, weren't we, Pepe? And you pointed out quite rightly how brilliantly this show has done, particularly in terms of its marketing and social media. If you just notice on the poster on the right, you've got, first of all, the crown above the eye, which I love that little detail there. But if you know your Tudor history, ladies and gentlemen, you'll know that there's a very famous rhyme about the 6 wives and how they all ended up divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. And underneath the logo, it says divorced, beheaded, live. And you're quite right, Pepe, that it's a stroke of genius, that, isn't it?
Very, very clever marketing. And that show was literally about to have their opening night as the lockdown happened on Broadway last March. So I hope that, I'm sure it will come back. And it will be interesting to know. I know that when 9/11 happened, Mamma Mia opened. Do you know this? The night that 9/11 happened on Broadway. And so that show could have died a death. But I think people, after 9/11 happened, people just needed to have fun in the theatre. And so I'm sure there'll be this kind of transition period where shows are going to come back that will just go gangbusters, because people just want to have fun and they just want a bit of fantasy and they want to laugh and they want to cry. And I think that's why I hope there's going to be a golden age for theatre coming up in the next year or so. And then one more show that's flying back into the West End, and this was only announced yesterday, coming back in August, is the production of Wicked. I was lucky enough to see the original pre-Broadway tryout for Wicked in San Francisco about 15 or 16 years ago. So yeah, it's one of my favorite shows. Now, I think, Simon, we need to move on to our last section. And I think in many ways, the most exciting part of our talk today, what is new, what is coming up in the West End. Now, I like a musical, Simon. I think you do too. Would I be correct?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes.
Now, what is your favorite musical? We were having a chat about this earlier. What do you think? If you had to choose one, what would it be?
Well, I've had to take a musical to a desert island, you know, a desert island musical. I think it would have to be Follies, I've decided. Yeah, Follies. And of course, I think it's the fact that... Good choice, because we had this amazing production of Follies at the National Theatre within the last 3 years, and it just reminded me how wonderful it is. Yeah, it would have to be Stephen Sondheim's Follies. What about you, Pepe?
I think for me, it's got to be West Side Story by Leonard Bernstein, so late 1950s. Now, I'll be honest and say that I've never seen a totally satisfying stage production of West Side Story, because the thing about that show is you have to have dancers who can act and sing, singers who can dance and act. So you need a triple threat for the cast. So hot off the press. And if you look online now, you'll find they've redone it as a film directed by Steven Spielberg. So there is a preview available now. It was shown, I think, during the Oscar ceremony a couple of nights ago. And I thought it was going to be a modern reworking of it. But in fact, it is faithful to the original. And it was, I must admit, it brought a tear to my eye hearing that incredible music. So at the end of this broadcast, do log on to YouTube after you've subscribed to our YouTube channel, of course, and have a listen and watch the little preview that's just been launched. It doesn't open until December, but I think it's going to bring a lot of people back into movie theatres and cinemas. Now, what musicals do we have opening in the West End? Well, of course, probably the biggest blockbuster we've got to look forward to this summer, I think it's delayed till August now, is the Disney juggernaut Frozen. Now, it was running on Broadway. In fact, it closed, I think, down within lockdown, won't be reopening on Broadway, directed by British director Michael Grandage, and it's going to be reworked for the London production. But the exciting thing about Frozen is, well, not only are we getting a big new Broadway musical opening in London, but it's going to reopen the renovated Drury Lane Theatre. And I don't know about you, Simon, I'm really excited to see what they've done inside that incredible theatre.
Yes, I mean, so again, they've reduced the number of seats by about 200 seats, and it's already one of the largest auditoriums in the West End. What's also really exciting is Andrew Lloyd Webber, who owns the theatre, he's also refitted it so that it will be accessible to the public during the daytime. And that's something, of course, that we've done with several buildings in the theatre spaces in London. So you'll be able to, enjoy the spaces in the daytime as well. I mean, yeah. Oh, and they've added 20 new, I think, toilets. The majority of them ladies' toilets, which ladies will be absolutely delighted about, because there's always been historically
a ticket for the show, isn't it? Just to go and use the new toilet.
Just to go and see the new loos at the Theatre Royal.
But I think that's very clever. That's very bold of them to open up that space. I know they bought the building next door, so it's going to be much more publicly accessible during the day, which I think is a stroke of genius. They've also updated behind the proscenium. So most theatres, they will often do a refit in the auditorium. They'll put in new lighting, LED lighting, redo the toilets. But it's very rare for a theatre to do everything behind the stage as well. So the areas that the audience don't see. Now, they got permission from English Heritage, I think, to remove some of the stage machinery that went back to World War I. So it will be interesting to see some of the illusions and stage effects that they do in Frozen, the first show to go in after the refit. So I'm very excited. Can you tell?
And also, they're also improving the disability access into the auditorium by creating these bridges from the building next door. And again, that's no mean feat in a historic building. So that's really good news for disability access.
Definitely, because I mean, most of our theatres were built, in Victorian in the 19th century, as well as very few toilets, very limited accessibility, I think, for some of the older theatres. Now, I think this is definitely something that Simon and I agree on. Probably the musical that we're looking forward to more than any other is the stage musical version of Moulin Rouge. It's coming into the Piccadilly in the late summer, and it is a stage version of the iconic, and we don't like to overuse that word, but it really is an iconic film. So Baz Luhrmann reinvented, I think, the film musical. Now, it's a jukebox musical, meaning that the songs essentially exist already, but they opened it on Broadway just a couple of years before lockdown, and it became an absolute blockbuster. And it's one of those shows where they essentially bring the piece into the auditorium, so you can see a photograph of what the auditorium is going to look like. And just for your enjoyment, ladies and gentlemen, I've got a very short preview to play. Hopefully, this will work rather well. So enjoy a preview of Moulin Rouge.
Welcome to the Moulin Rouge.
There we go. Just a little bit of a teaser for you. You're looking forward to that as well, I think, Simon, aren't you?
Oh, it looks fantastic, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly what the West End needs. Now, another production, another musical coming in, and I'm sure many of those of you in Britain will know some of the music from this. This is The Lord, Andrew Lloyd Webber, a new musical opening at the newly named Julian Lynn Theatre, which is quite important for the naming of theatres, I believe, Simon.
Yes, it is. Yes, Julian Lynn was this world famous choreographer. She did all the choreography for Cats back in 1981. She did the staging for Phantom of the Opera in 1986, and she passed away 3 years ago. And it's the first West End theatre to be named after a non-royal female. So
fantastic!
Yeah,
about time.
About time. Absolutely.
So I think the soundtrack for this has already been recorded and released, and a lot of the cast, very young, unknown cast, and it's quite a brave show to put on, because for many in Britain, we will think of Cinderella as panto, something that is normally associated with the holiday of the Christmas season. And so I think the jury is still out whether this will be the huge hit that Lloyd Webber is hoping for, but that opens just after lockdown ends, or starts previewing at the end of May, I believe. And then I think we've got one more musical before we move on and finish with a few plays. So another jukebox musical, a jukebox musical based on an iconic, again, overusing that word, but it is an iconic trilogy of films started in the late 1980s, starring Michael J. Fox. How do you musicalize a DeLorean car? Well, we've got a little preview for you. So this is backed by a huge film company. So they put a little bit of money on creating a preview. They had a tryout at the big theatre in Manchester. But ladies and gentlemen, here's a preview of Back to the Future.
Hey, I'm here for the show.
Name?
Marty McFly.
You're late.
Yeah, you know me, Tardy Marty.
I'm Dr. Earl Run. I'm a scientist. You're late?
No, it's just...
Great Scott! You're it! Let's keep it all in secret. He'll do.
There we go, just a little preview for you. And I'm sure those of you that know the original films will recognize the actor Christopher Lloyd reading the Evening Standard there, who played the original role of Doc in the film. So it's quite nice him handing the baton over to the actor cast playing that role on stage. I thought that was quite sweet, Simon. Now, I think we need to move on to finish off with a few plays. So I put a message out on Facebook a couple of days ago asking for some suggestions for from my colleagues, some of the shows that they were looking most forward to. And so a couple of suggestions. So there's a season that is going into the Harold Pinter Theatre, formerly the Comedy Theatre, that is being produced by Sonia Friedman. Sonia Friedman is one of the great female theatre producers of her day, both here and on Broadway as well. And so she's doing 3 plays that are all going to be filmed for later broadcast on television. So there we go. There's another example of post-COVID and what has kind of influenced the way shows are going to be enjoyed by audiences in the future. So the third play, Anna X, you might recognize Emma Corrin on the left there, who played Lady Diana, or the Diana Princess of Wales, in the 4th series of The Crown. And I think she won the Emmy, didn't she, Simon, for her portrayal fairly recently?
She did.
And then the Bridge Theatre have got a season of 3 plays already on sale. The second one starring Simon Russell Beale, one of the great stage actors of his day, playing Johann Sebastian Bach. But the production at the Bridge that I'm looking most forward to is a production that was delayed from last year during lockdown. So they're putting on stage La Belle Sauvage. So I think it's going to be called The Book of Dust, isn't it, on stage, Simon? And so this is Philip Pullman. Some of you might know his Dark Materials that the National Theatre did 17 years ago. And it was also directed by Nick Heitner. I think there was a fantastic BBC adaptation of it recently. So that's the production, I think, the play that I'm looking forward to more than any other. And then just to finish off, is this incredible revival of a play called Constellation. Now, you saw the original production of Constellations, I believe, Simon, is that right?
Yes, I did. Yes. Gosh, again, the time goes by so quickly. I think it was about 5 years ago.
I think it was the year of the Olympics. I've got a feeling it was 2012. I might be wrong on that.
Oh, my goodness, even longer than that.
Now,
what's exciting about this? Oh, no, no.
Yeah, no, you go for it, Simon. Go for it.
Well, what's exciting about this is you can see that it just had, one cast originally with 2 actors, and you can see there it has 4 new casts. And if we show you the images of the 4 different casts, in fact, the original cast was male, female, and you can see here we have male, female, we have male, male, and we also have a black couple, and we have an older couple. And I think this is brilliant because it just proves the point that really I can't think of really many shows that actually don't work regardless of colour or gender or age. And I think this is a great way of proving that.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing that, I have to say. And then just one more production that I'm particularly looking forward to, and I had tickets for it last March, would you believe? I think it was March or maybe slightly later. But this is the London premiere of To Kill a Mockingbird. So I'm sure many of you know that iconic book. There's that word again, iconic. But it was actually put on stage on Broadway and became the biggest American play in Broadway history, taking more than $55 million at the Broadway box office. Only Harry Potter, which is a British production, has taken more as a play on Broadway. And so they announced it to great fanfare. Rhys Ifans, great Welsh actor, was going to be playing the lead, but he can't do it when it reopens, finally gets to open in the West End at the beginning of next year. And the lead is going to be played by one of my favorite actors, Rafe Spall. So there's something else to look out for.
So, and in a happy coincidence, Pepe, Rafe Spall was one of the original actors in Constellations.
Of course, of course.
So you see, Simon, it all links up.
It all links up in the end. Now, Simon, I thought that was really good fun going through some of our most, some of the things that I'm really looking forward to. Now, is there anything particular that you're looking forward to the most?
Well, I have to say, one thing I am looking forward to is there's going to be a new production of Under Milk Wood, which was originally written as a radio play by Dylan Thomas back in the 1950s. And that's going to be staged at the Olivier Theatre at the National Theatre, starring Michael Sheen, who's one of my favourite actors, and I'm sure yours as well, and also Sian Phillips, who is one of the great grand dames of the theatre, who many people will remember from I, Claudius, the television series, but that's going to be at the National. So I'm quite looking forward to that.
That sounds like it's going to be a bit of a blockbuster, I have to say. Now, ladies and gentlemen, so we hope we've whetted your appetite with what there is to look forward to if you decide to come on a trip to London. So we've shown you this website before. Here's the Guide London website, guidelondon.org.uk. So we've got more than 570 members that guide in more than 30 different languages. So as well as if you can't come to London because of restrictions quite yet, many of our guides are doing virtual tours. So you can go to our virtual tour portal, which you can see on the front page there. You just click on London Virtual Tour. You then fill out the form, and then that sends an email to Guide London Towers. And hopefully 3 guides will get back to you pretty quickly. But you can also do a guide search if you're ready to come to London and you'd like to have a blue badge guide guiding you around London. Of course, Simon and myself, we're both available, but you can also go to Guide Match or Find a Guide, which is at the bottom here as well. You'll also find lots of blogs about theatre on the Guide London website. We would like to say thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk about Theatreland, one of my great loves. I couldn't think of anybody that I would rather do it with than Simon Whitehouse. So thank you for joining me, Simon.
It's a pleasure, Pepe. Good fun.
Thank you, Simon. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, don't forget, let's try and get up to 1,000 in the next couple of weeks. And also don't forget to tell your friends about these free broadcasts that we do every Tuesday at 4 o'clock. So stay safe and well, everyone, and we will see you all again very soon. And thank you for joining us.